What's going on, YouTube? Culturedog Sam Hatch back here with some more Blu-ray action. Another Spotlight review that I've owed for quite some time. These actually came out back in March, so many apologies. I was probably so wrapped up in my whole week in the life of video series that I didn't get a chance to drop these in time. But what better time than now to return to the world of Species. Yes, Species 2. I'd kind of almost forgotten that this movie happened. It came out in theaters in 1998, and obviously the first film was enough of a success that they decided to bring it back and go a little bit slightly lower in budget. But they got Natasha Henstridge back and realized that her character wasn't really terrifying. Like I mentioned in my review of Species on Laserdisc, they made her a very sympathetic character. So on one hand, like, you don't really want to see her fail in her goals, even though she does kill people. But then you don't want really people to catch her either and put her back in a cage or what have you. So this film is smart enough to kind of recast her character in a new light and allow her to do something different. But yeah, Species 2 is directed by Peter Medak, which is kind of cool. You had Roger Donaldson doing the original, and then now you got this guy who had done stuff like Romeo is Bleeding around the same time. So again, not someone you would normally grab to direct a horror franchise installment, which is a good thing. It does completely ignore the cliffhanger of the first film, which is usually relatively an inexcusable crime. But it does it to reestablish another source of the species, kind of virus or strain, this time on Mars. And it doesn't really explain itself that well. Is it from the exact same aliens that sent the DNA, alteration in the first film, or is this an alternate species? I mean, maybe that was answered and I just totally spaced out during it. But it has a Mars mission, so if you've seen The Martian, you're going to love this. It's got a Mars mission with Justin Lazard and a couple of people, including McKelty Williamson, on his mission team. And he's taking soil samples, and of course, everything that you find on Mars is alien-based, and once it goes back onto the ship and everyone's ready to return to Earth, stuff that is sealed ends up loosening, and this kind of black viscous fluid, it's almost like the Venom suit from Spider-Man, escapes, and some of these astronauts are missing time on their mission. So kind of Contact-esque thing. So they return and are checked over and thought to be okay, and Justin Lazard is this young up-and-coming hero, young astronaut, and James Cromwell plays his dad. They've got, political hopes for him. Maybe he'll be president someday. Chris Brancato wrote the screenplay and decided to recast this as a kind of Manchurian Candidate thing. And that was kind of looked upon as this real kind of wild original concept, but that's kind of already a cliche of its own. There'd been a lot of other, if not like Manchurian Candidate sci-fi horror films, but there had been enough of the astronaut films where something goes wrong. And shortly after this, there was The Astronaut's Wife, and even an episode of The Venture Brothers did a spaceborne Manchurian Candidate riff at one point. So it didn't feel that refreshing, and I didn't feel like that smart of a move, and it was so needed to jettison the finale of the first film. As goofy as the finale of the first film was, and that's the thing, they didn't really want to deal with that. This thing gets saddled with its own goofy finale, as we'll learn a little bit later. But essentially, Justin Lazard is the new Species character, the new sexual killer. And he's a little bit more, they make him sympathetic in a certain fashion because he's unaware of this nature that's now forced upon him. He's already a bit of a womanizer, but now there's a kind of nasty, murderous edge to it, and he doesn't really understand what's going on. So they play at a little bit of that body horror stuff, that David Cronenberg would love to do, but not that far, not as far as The Fly or something like that, where he's that much of a tragic character. He does eventually embody, evil, and runs off trying to do his thing. Meanwhile, they have to get some of the team back together again. So Mark Helgenberger returns and Michael Madsen returns. So they're going to go out and hunt this dude down and try and stop him. And McKelty Williamson gets along for the ride, though he gets saddled with a lot of kind of racist dialogue, and he's kind of forced to shuck and jive a little bit. And yeah, it's pretty cringy from moment to moment. But these characters are hunting this guy. There's some genuine tension as they are. There's a bit where they're running around a parking lot trying to find him while he's, he is kind of shown to be this ferocious, not date rapist, but just general, like, kind of rapist at large. And that does have a kind of creepy edge to it that has an applicability to real life. There could be a guy like this out there that isn't necessarily combined with alien DNA, but just a nasty individual like that. So that does have some tension to it. And this is kind of the coolest out of the series because the gore it's really amped up and the practical effects are really amped up. There's a completely bizarre, bonkers scene with a pregnancy gone to hell moment early on in the film. Yeah, obviously reminiscent of Alien, and it wears that reference on its sleeves, but there's a lot of bonkers stuff going on. Really visceral and nasty, and a lot of good horror show gore effects and stuff like that. So this one definitely delivers more as a horror film, I think. And Eve is another version of Syl from the first film, but she's a little bit more controlled, and she's a more interesting character this time. Again, she has these urges to mate, but they're trying to tame that. Mark Helgenberger is still kind of overseeing this experiment, and George Zunza, of course, is this doofus military agent that's always on the verge of weaponizing the whole thing or destroying it. And Eve is kind of this interesting character because now there's something else out there like her, and she's compelled to mate with it, whether or not she actively wants to do that. So it's got a little bit of interesting juju to it. It does have a wrap-up that apparently pissed off the writer, which is pretty interesting to learn about. But there's a pretty cool showdown, and overall, I think I enjoyed this as a horror film more than the first film. So there you go, Species 2. I'd heard some people complaining about the visual quality of this, but I didn't see any problems. There were some things that looked a little washed out because of the digital compositing. This was, again, not early CGI, but it still wasn't really amazing at integrating some of the CG footage with the regular live action stuff. There's some footage on the spaceship early on that's really, really stark contrast, really deep blacks and really nice reds, etc. It does actually look like it's on a set, though. It doesn't look that convincing that they're out in outer space, but then they have a lot of the shots of the Mars rover and all that stuff that looks a little bit more digital and a little grayer. So there's a bit of that, but this thing is loaded with practical effects, and those things shine. And I think this overall had a pretty good color. It's 1.85 to 1, so no widescreen Panavision vistas like the last film had a lot of good color to it again, like the first film, and some real aggressive CG stuff, including a character that destroys himself only to be reborn as maybe bit off a little bit more than it could chew at the time, but pretty well implemented overall. But yeah, the live action stuff looked really good. Good color, good punch, vibrancy to the contrast, and I thought it was pretty satisfying. And you could see in some of the darker bits towards the end, you could see what was going on. There was a decent amount of shadow detail, and because you need to see some of the creatures a little bit, and of course they're shot in the dark necessarily so that everything doesn't look too hokey. But I thought it played out really well. As usual, Scream Factory's got the DTS-HD Master Audio 5.1. Nothing amazing. There's some good surround development, but overall, nothing really jumped out at me as, oh my god, it doesn't have a Christopher Young score this time. Edward Shermer does it. Serviceable. But again, there's a few moments of creative sound palette action, but for the most part, it was just serviceable. You could hear the dialogue really well, and but it did the job. There are actually a decent amount of special features on here. Some old stuff and some new stuff. There's new interviews with Natasha Henstridge, Creature Creations interviews with Steve Johnson and more. There's a new interview with screenwriter Chris Brancato, which is really cool and refreshing. I kind of like when they do the new interviews. Of course, the vintage featurettes are always okay enough for these things, because sometimes they'll get actors that you could never get now. And of course, back then, they're forced to do the press junk in action. But then it's also cool to have the retrospectives, now that a little bit of time has passed. Over 10 years has passed since the making, almost 20 years since this film's come out. So it's cool to see what everybody actually thought about this in their career. And Natasha Henstridge has a really cool attitude about the Species films, and is talking about, you know, where she came from, how she got into film, how things actually went really well for her easily up front, and yeah, possibly getting typecast, etc. But Chris Marcato is great to listen to because he really didn't enjoy tinkering with the producer and the studio, especially with the ending of the film, when he had a very specific goal about, you know, what needs to happen, and there's like, you know, throw in shocks just for the sake of shocks. You know, it doesn't matter if it makes absolutely no narrative sense. You're like, what about this and what about that? And it's really cool because he tried to save the day and play these guys off of each other, and the bad ideas just kept piling on. And instead of whittling those away, they just kept amassing until finally there's this big goofy, huh? What? Why? So, just for the sake of shock ending. But yeah, so that was a really cool thing. And Chris Marcato's not a guy that minces words very much, so that was cool. And also some special effects outtakes and behind the scenes footage. Again, some real nasty, gnarly stuff, and you can see it up close and personal. And there's an audio commentary with Peter Medak, actually. I thought that was really cool that he did that. And not a lot of intense gaps and everything like that. Good practical knowledge about the making of the film, and again, he seems to like the form of Natasha Henstridge. It lets you know. And yeah, a bunch of scenes from the film, some stuff that wasn't shown in theaters, theatrical trailers, still galleries, production sketches, etc. So special feature wise, it's pretty well loaded. So if you're a fan of Species 2, I definitely want to pick this up. Yeah, I think it's a rather decent sequel to a film that, you know, isn't exactly one of my favorites. So yeah, cheers to Species 2.